Welcome to my podcast. Today, I will be speaking with Austin McCarville, and we'll be discussing his role as a substitute, AI, and the relationship of humans with AI. We also kind of discussed the influence of culture on youth and how you could see that from youth and as people grow up too. I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you share it and like it. All right, so as I said, my guest is Austin. So you are a sub for, you work in mainly middle schools, if I...
Pretty much just middle school, yeah. Occasionally I'll swing up top to high school, but that's usually just out of favors for old teachers.
Okay. Is there anything interesting you've seen when you... I know you could go stories, but if there's anything interesting you've seen when you interact with students, or even the past that now you're like, this was who I was, and now you're looking at it and you're like, now these are the people that I'm supposed to be the guide for, and I still recognize that I still feel like do you still feel like almost an imposter syndrome where you feel like you don't deserve to?
Sometimes, yeah. So the main thing is that the middle school that I predominantly work at is my old middle school. So it's been a year and 3 months now. In the very beginning, when I was just subbing like around the district, just kind of whatever school was available that day, I was only ever at RAU every now and then. So it definitely felt like imposter syndrome, like, oh, I'm just a student. Like a lot of my old teachers were still working there. So that was really weird. And then in May of last year, they asked me to come on 3 days a week. And then this school year, while I've been down at Oregon State, I just work on Fridays. So I have pretty much, except for 1 or 2 days, just been at RAU. So now that it's been over a year or almost a year that I've been pretty much just there, the imposter syndrome has mostly worn off. Like students calling me Mr. McCarville isn't like, it's not weird anymore. Yeah. There are a good chunk of students that do call me Austin, which I'm okay with, but like, and then I've now developed a first name basis with a lot of my like former teachers where it's like, I don't call them Mr. and Mrs. anymore. They're just their first name because we're peers now. So I think as time has gone on, the imposter syndrome has worn off, but there are times when like I'll pull a kid aside and I'll have I'll talk to them. Maybe they were like acting out or something. Because a lot of times with this school, they'll have me come on like a Friday, not even just to be a sub for a specific class. They'll have me be like extra help. So that might end up with me being like student support is what it's called, which could just be like wandering the hallways, popping into different classrooms, helping out. So I do end up having like one-on-ones with students a lot, and I'll give them like some advice, and then like, hey, this is why you shouldn't do that. Maybe, hey, muttering under your breath when you walk away from the principal, that's what gets you more in trouble. And then I'll turn around and I'll think back, wow, my mom told me that when I was their age, and now I'm telling them that. And I'm like, and I still remember it. So they might still remember it in 7 years. I hope I told them exactly what I was supposed to say. That is the biggest fear I have. And I don't kind of like self-doubt where it's like, some of these kids do come to school and with bad home lives, and the teachers are their influences. Maybe their parents aren't really around. And so like the educators at the school are the main influences in their life. And I'm not there that much, but I do worry sometimes, I hope I say everything right. 'Cause you never know, like when you tell someone something, they might remember that like forever. Sure. So that's like main fear. But yeah, but the most interesting thing I think has been seeing how like school culture has changed at this specific school and how it has stayed the same. Like when I went to school at RAU in 2014, 2016, soccer was the most popular sport at the school, and it still is. The school does still have like a pretty high like disciplinary rate, like it did when I was there. But I have seen firsthand like just the social media boom, how it has affected the kids. Like, I mean, when I was in middle school, like some kids had Instagram, but not every kid. I don't think anybody had Snapchat until like 8th grade. Like most kids still just pretty much just had Facebook. But now, and then also like not every kid had a phone. And if you did have a phone, it was probably not allowed to be taken to school. Like I wasn't allowed to bring my phone to school. But every kid has a phone now. And so it's like everything is filmed. Everything goes on Snapchat. And I think that does create a lot of pressure for the kids, like to constantly like be on their not best behavior, but
there's a lot more accountability.
Yeah, there's a lot more accountability because you never know when 15 kids are going to whip out their phones and post you. Yeah. And I think that does create a lot of fear and stress for like the kids, they're going through puberty and stuff, and then they're always constantly worried that they're going to get filmed and posted.
Where's the boundary? Do you think there's a healthy fear, or do you think that it almost as a teenager or in these years where you feel like you're being defined by something like that. Most people don't give themselves grace when they're that young.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably going to be very hard on themselves, which to the extreme, I would say. Do you think that there is a balance, or like how do you enforce that good idea? And because it could cause people to be better behaved, but it also could potentially cause them to feel more pressure than necessary, because they are just middle schoolers.
Yeah, I think that the biggest mistake, in my opinion, this is my humble opinion,
Sure.
Has been clamping down on phones and like banning them.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to a lot of kids about this, and you could say, oh well, they're kids, of course they're going to say they want phones, but I've seen it firsthand, and I was a student very recently.
Yeah.
And I feel like what they should be doing is teaching proper phone use, and not being like off and away from the opening bell to the last bell. If we see it, you're getting a ticket and it's going to the office. Like, no matter what.
Yeah.
I feel like unless you like prove that you're like texting your mom in an emergency or something, and then that's also, you could say, as an invasion of privacy. Like, kid will be like, oh, I'm texting my mom, and I'm like, how am I going to be like, well, let me read? So, but I feel like the main thing should be just teaching kids proper phone use. Like, I mean, phones aren't going away. Like, I guess when phones were first coming out, people might have thought it was a fad. Like when smartphones, like, oh, well, you're not always going to have a calculator in your pocket. Well, I think we have shown that now you will always have a calculator in your pocket. Now I'm not saying you shouldn't teach math.
Sure.
But like, I do think that proper phone use would be a better way to go about it. So then by the time they get to high school, they're not running around filming everything. It's like, hey, some kids don't like being filmed. Like, okay, yeah, if your friend wants to do something funny and he's like, hey, film this, absolutely go film that. He wants you to they want you to film it. But I feel like teaching proper phone use would maybe foster a better environment for healthy social media versus like talking about, oh, it's bad, we shouldn't do that, it's not good, and then kids might just like run rampant with it when they're in their free time.
It's interesting, because I think, well, even the thought that, because the fact is everything's changing. It's not that there's you can't treat the world like it was still 10 years ago when we were in that position, because everything is going to change, and it always does change. Even because the fact is, when we were there, they were still treating it, and because it was a brand new thing, you could kind of treat it like it was the past. But now it's kind of been developed into everything. Everything lives and survives on it, and I don't think you can actually treat it the same way, because it is a different world than it was when we were there. And we may end up getting the benefits of not having to deal with some of that, but then also they may end up learning some important skills that we didn't have to worry about back then, which is ironic, because usually when people talk about that, or the parents talk about that, they're referencing how we're the generation that's dealing with stuff that they didn't have to deal with. And I'm like, oh, well, you look at the next generation too that's in these schools that I guess I didn't have to deal with that. And of course, everyone deals with their own thing. Everything. Yeah. There's always going to be bullying. There's always going to be things like that. But the technology around it is always, it may change, but it's still, human characters is going to be the same. I think people are going to use the technology that's there for them to accomplish that. And that might be the difference, because the technology is just going to be used in that light, because human character won't change, which is interesting, because that's where that separation is. There's even technologies out in the world where you're like, yeah, it could cause a lot of damage, but then they also could cause good, and we're going to talk about in the future AI too. So I'm like, and that kind of can even relate, and we can talk about that too as we go on. But it's like, it's interesting to see how this all relates, even, and you could see it as simply when you go back and you look at childhood and you look at education and when you were in school, and it's almost part of it could be healthy. I think that there is a benefit to being in these environments where you could get hurt, but that's going to teach you some skills that you weren't aware of, and that may be actually beneficial for you to know, because most people aren't aware of all these things that they need to know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I think because we were kind of like the guinea pig generation, like when we were coming up in middle school, none of our teachers, no matter what, had smartphones, because they weren't a thing, unless you maybe had like a first-year teacher, I guess. But now there are teachers that are, 20, 23, including some of my coworkers that are young teachers, and I see how it's completely treated. It's treated with a completely different perspective. Like, there were teachers that I had when I went to the school that are still teaching there, and their stance on phones is pretty much the exact same as it was when I was a student. But then I'll see some of the other teachers that are in their first, second, third year teaching, and they have fully embraced it. Like, okay, we're going to do a warm up for 20 minutes, and then you guys get like a 2-minute break, check your phone, send a text, snap your friend back, and then we're going to resume back into work time. And I think the initial fear with people with that was like, oh, well, then they're never going to put them away. Like, if you let them have them out for 2 minutes, then they're not going to want to put it back. And I have actually really seen, and even myself, like when I am like running a classroom, hey guys, we're just going to take a 2-minute break.
Yeah. Like
2 or 3 minutes, and then you clap your hands or ring the bell, whatever, and then they dial back in because they're able to get that energy out. Like me and some other teachers had like a circle meeting with some kids, and we passed the ball around, and it was one of those things, like, okay, you could talk when you have the ball. And the main thing I was seeing was kids were saying that they wish that they were allowed to use their phones at lunch. Just 20 minutes, because they go outside after they eat. Yeah. Just 20 minutes where they can just check it, do whatever, and then lock back in for class, because then that would hopefully negate doing this in class, checking it. Yeah. Which I think, there's always going to be students that are going to abuse powers no matter what. That's never going to change. Like you said, like human behavior is never going to change. But I do think it is interesting, like seeing like the age, like the generation gap, where it's like the people who did grow up with it more are much more willing to incorporate it into the system and into like their not curriculum, like intricate it into the way the students, how they learn, versus just like, no. And I think like we were talking about AI, actually, me and some of my coworkers the other day, talking about Chat GPT and like students using it for essays and stuff. And we were saying, well, no, that's not good. Like, like a seventh grader, if they just use it to write all their assignments, they're not doing anything really. But there are times when, it could be useful. I think also for teachers, like one of my coworkers was saying that she was using it to get some ideas for like lesson plans. Sure. Like they'll look up like 7th grade level lesson on like drunk driving. Yeah. And then the health teacher could draw from that, get some ideas from just, it draws data from, I'm sure, everything. Yeah. And then they use it to jog some of their ideas. So I think that tools like that could be a really useful tools for teachers going forward, honestly.
I will say it's not everything, but I know, listening to some podcasts with them, they pull from large databases of open source information and also information they've been given permission to. It is interesting that I'm like, there is so much more, because it's a developed. Google gave so much information where it's like, now we have this, and it's right at our fingertips. And now this is almost like, this is the developed form of that. Yeah. Now we have ways where it's actually properly developed information. It's pulling from research articles. It's pulling from all this stuff, and then it's putting it into terms we're going to understand. And it's using AI, and it's using algorithms that can process in the way that, and it knows that this is how we're going to understand it, which is fascinating to see how that will work. Because then you're seeing that in education too. Well, even I think I was listening to another podcast, and they were talking how maybe we can't act like it's not going to exist. Students are going to use this, and maybe that means that they can't use it to completely write their essay. But if they want to use that, there's information they could find online. They can use that, and then they can work with it and then create their own work from it. You can't completely take away a technology, because this is the world now. Yeah. It is interesting that even these students recognize that. I do think one thing when you're talking about breaks and those type of and for students in classes, it did make me interested, because and I recognize high school classes were much shorter than college classes, but even the difference when I will have an hour and 50-minute long class, and the professor's like, you'll have a 5 or 10 minute break halfway. Or he even incentivizes, he's like, or I'll let you guys out 10, 15 minutes early. Oh, yeah. With that incentive where you're like, either you're going to work through the whole class knowing you're going to get off early, or you do get a moment to relax in the middle where it does relieve stress. And it's in a different level. And also, a lot of these classes may be a lot more complex. But, relative to where students are, everything may have more work, and it's going to be more mentally draining potentially when you have an hour and 50 minutes to rather than 55, which that was my classes, or hour 20 minutes depending on the school I went to. But it is interesting that you can see that difference where if you do give them a break, or you create that mindset where you know that they're going to need to. You can't lecture the whole class, or you're going to lose students as you go.
Yeah.
And people are they're not going to be entertained. And you do want to also make it also an environment that they're going to enjoy learning.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I don't know how your college classes are, but that's how it has been. In a lot of mine are heavy math and physics classes that need that, where if people start going and they keep on lecturing, you're just kind of like, wow, we're still here, and I still have another hour to go. And giving me 10 minutes where I feel like rather than spending where I feel like, because I can then be prone as we're going halfway through the class, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to pull out my phone. They're not going to punish me. There's nothing that they can do. And rather than having to feel like I'm going to do that for the last 15 minutes because I'm exhausted, and they're not giving anything, you give this designated time where I know that this is what I have. There's nothing happening in the background I have to worry about. I can leave if I want to, and I don't have the pressure of feeling like I'm missing something. That can even relieve a lot of stress, and I can imagine that it would do the same in high school and middle school, which it is interesting because I never even thought about it that way, even when they would incentivize, when you talk about where they give breaks, where it can increase even probably productivity. Because that's the whole thought of even in the workplace.
Yeah, because the thing with breaks is like, I have, so in my experience at university, I've only had one class that was less than 2 hours that gave us a break in the middle. I had one 8 a.m. class last 2 terms ago that was an hour and 50 minutes. And after an hour, we got like a 5-minute break. But in my experience, for the most part, the only classes where I've gotten like a break in the middle have been classes that were longer than 2 hours. But that's, it's a really long time versus middle school where, except for Wednesdays where we have late start, where school starts an hour later because we have a staff meeting. And then so each class is 10 minutes shorter. Normally they're about an hour and 5 minutes, hour and 10 minutes long. And so, but the problem with that age group with saying like, doing like you said, like the reverse of a break would be like, oh, once you're done, you can get at the end. Is you if you want to do that, you have to make an individual basis. You have to say, okay, when you are done, come up and show me your worksheet or whatever, and then you get free time. You can't really do like, hey, if the whole class, and I made this mistake early on, where the teacher would give me permission in the sub note and say like, hey, once everyone's finished, you can throw on a movie or something, right? Like if it was because I do normally work on Fridays, which Fridays is the most likely day to where you're going to be wrapping things up and you're going to maybe have some free time. So like I would say like, oh, like you tell the kids, you have an hour and 5 minutes of class left, whatever. Hey, once everybody's done, I'll throw something on Disney Plus. But then you have kids who are just going to rush through it because no one wants to be that one kid that's still working and everyone's just waiting for you to finish so you can watch Inside Out. But, and then you get kids who just rush through it. So I found that you either really have to do like, okay, we're going to do 20 minutes. Everyone takes a 5-minute break and then finish out. And then if you finish, you can show me. Or you have to say, hey, we're going to work straight through. Once you show me, I check it, give you the all clear. Then you can pull out your Chromebook and play cool math games. Like you can't really do like with that age group. And this might be different for high school. Sure. Again, I don't have much experience with high school, but like you can't really do like how it is in college where it's like, okay, we're all going to take. Or
they're not like
you'd say,
extremely long lecture classes where you're taking notes on slides. And it is different. You can't expect in college, you're paying for these things where you have the incentive to write it down and to take good notes. You don't really have that incentive in middle school and high school. That is true that the break doesn't completely work in the same way. That's true too. It is interesting. I don't know if it's based on the classes or maybe it's also the school incentives.
Depends on the kids. Like there's some classes where it's like I do really trust them, and it's like, okay, I know that this specific 6-period social studies class they're all hard workers for the most part, and I can trust them and give them a little more leeway. So like I can maybe give them like, hey, what do you guys want to do? Do you guys want to work 30 minutes, take a 5-minute break, work? Do you guys want to work for an hour, get the last 10 minutes off? And I will I trust that these kids will not manipulate my willingness to give them choice into doing as little work as possible. So that's what I think, like when I'm a teacher, like I've thought about like, I just had to write a final paper for my class last term about my teaching philosophy. And one of the things that I always really liked when I was in high school, and it only happened a couple times, was like class constitutions, where it's like the first day of class, like the very first thing you do besides like saying your name and your favorite ice cream flavor or whatever, was like, okay, what does 5th period, not what does Mr. M's entire associates class, what does 5th period, what do they want the rules to be? Do you guys want to have a 5-minute break? Do you guys want to have this? And then If a class decides the rules and they stick to it, then you can reward them with that. If they all agree on a rule set and then they are just totally taking advantage of it, you can take that freedom away. And I feel like, kind of giving that choice initially, or starting off with a lack of choice and then the classes, or you could do the reverse, like starting off with a lack of choice. Like, I know a lot of teachers are like, okay, we're going to start with a seating chart. And then after a month, if you guys are good, you can pick where you want to sit. And I think that kind of stuff is golden. Like, I remember when I was a kid, like whenever we were given the opportunity to earn more freedom, I feel like 90% of kids would, like, there's always going to be kids that do not care whatsoever. Nothing you will do will make them care. But most kids, I think, do respond to being treated not like adults, but like not like children. Like when you tell a 12-year-old, yeah, they're still 12, but when I tell a 12-year-old 7th grader, like, hey, if you do this, you can do this, I feel like they respect that versus me being like, nope, sorry, my way or the highway, which you do need to do that sometimes. Yeah. But for kids, I think that earn it, I think it is nice to give them more choice, because it's all, I think it's going to just increase their willingness to do work for you. Like the mean teachers, no one wants to do work in the mean teachers class
because they don't get freedom.
Yeah. And sometimes you do need to be a mean teacher. I've been a mean teacher, but I feel like if you are so strict and you just never give them any choice, I feel like you're not even giving kids a chance to give you a chance.
Yeah.
But I know everything, everyone's different,
What do you think is talking about let's say the 10% where you say that, or the small amount that doesn't want that, why do you think they wouldn't want that?
I think there's a lot of factors. Like, I've only been doing this for just over a year, but like I have, and I know it was like people, when we were kids, our parents would tell us like, oh, bullies just have a hard home life. And when you're a kid, you're like, what? There's me. They don't like me because I have glasses, or they don't like me because I like Star Wars. Like, and I feel like I was in that camp where I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, but then I realized that was probably even a piece of my own privilege. Like, I had parents that didn't hit me. I always knew where my next meal was coming from. I didn't go to school with like a hateful heart. But then now that I'm working there, I do see kids where it's like, they just have so much like hate and just so much like sorrow in their heart. And it's like, you're only 12. And it's like, I feel for them. It's like, I can't believe that you're already this hard into the world at age 12, at age 13. And I feel like whenever I do, I'm not there that much. I'm only there once a week, on break. Sometimes like winter break, I was there every day, But like for the most part, and then I'll walk up to a teacher, a normal teacher who's there every day, and I'll say, man, this student X was really giving me a hard time today. And they'll say, oh, student X's parents are going through a divorce right now. Or, oh, student X, he only eats at school. Like, that's the only, like, he gets breakfast and lunch because it's free, And then I feel like that does offer a different perspective, where you're not justifying the behavior.
You give them humanity.
And it gives them humanity. And then you're able to look at it and say, okay, well, this kid never does anything, a single thing I say. And I can think of multiple examples where it's like, I'm like, this student was just never doing anything I say. And then I find out what they go through, and you take a different perspective and you say, okay, well, hey, why do you not care? Oh, well, my parents don't care about my grades. Okay, well, do you care about your grades? No, middle school grades don't count. And I'm like, well, yes, when you are looking at it, when you are applying for a job in 6 years, they will not look at your middle school grades. That is true, but it's about building a foundation and building habits. And I feel like a lot of the students who don't care, they haven't been told that at home. Like, I remember, like, my parents told me, like, hey, it's all, building habits, patterns, doing your homework. You might seem counterproductive, it might seem redundant to you, but it's teaching you to keep up with your tasks, right? It's teaching you to, like, be always thinking about stuff. And I feel like when kids aren't told that at home, like they're told middle school doesn't matter. I will get you in trouble if you get a referral. That's the biggest kicker, is the kids who don't face consequences at home. There's only so much you can do. You suspend a kid, then he gets to go home and play Xbox for 3 days. Like, there's some kids where you can't take a conventional punishment path with. Yeah. Like, I know multiple students who they've gathered enough information where they know that when they're suspended, they sit at home and play video games. That's not a punishment. You're just letting them go home for a couple days. Like, you're giving them a 5-day weekend. And so I feel like like you were saying, like the 10% that they just don't vibe with anything adults are telling them. I feel like is often because they don't have a strong presence outside of the home. And it's just a general statement, but it's like they have never had an adult tell them things like, you need to do this to be sick. Like, you need to do this. You need to build healthy habits. So it's like, why, if your parents aren't telling you that, why would you listen to me?
True.
There's only so much you can do.
Well, in those situations, they also don't feel loved. They
Mm-hmm.
don't have a sense of,
Mm-hmm.
they don't feel like they're appreciated or
Mm-hmm.
wanted. And when they go to school, they can't identify with a teacher and a teacher's not going to love you the same way a parent should,
Mm-hmm.
but a teacher can take on
Mm-hmm.
your struggles and recognize that they're going through something, and they could
Mm-hmm.
take that on, and this child just doesn't understand
Mm-hmm.
that either. And I think that it's interesting that you can even see how it plays out with those people, because there's that pressure that they don't understand what's going on, but it is going on.
Yeah.
And it's because that could, and you see it play out in the future where, and often sometimes it is true that those people will often end up being the people that are going to control their children, the future in the same way, and then it's going to
it's just like the
repeat
cycle.
itself.
Yeah.
It's a cycle.
That's why I feel like people don't often underestimate like the value of teaching. It's like it's easy. I mean, like, obviously I'm going to say that I'm going to be a teacher, but it's like even me, like I had a good home life. Like I said, like I didn't have to worry about like, like being scared or like cold at home,
Sure.
But like there were things that I was more comfortable telling teachers. Like I remember like initially when I was in like high school and like some of like my mental health issues came back, I didn't want to tell my parents at first because I was like, oh, well, I don't want to burden my parents with that. So I would tell my Spanish teacher, I would tell my forestry teacher, I would tell my math teacher, like, hey, I'm really struggling with this thing. And they were there for me. And it's like, it's not that that's not my parents weren't there for me, because when I told them eventually that they were. But it's like, it was nice knowing that I had those other outlets. And I think that's what really inspired me to go into teaching, was like, I had so many teachers that made such a positive influence on my life and a positive impact on me. And it's like, I could go to them to talk about the 49ers game that happened yesterday, or I could go to talk to them about like, hey, I'm really struggling with this thing. Can I just eat lunch with you today and just talk? And I really feel like that is like the value. And I feel like as what's being undervalued, like teachers are, I think, very undervalued in society. And like people don't, like, I think teachers get a lot of hate a lot of times. And I think that people
They're an
don't,
emotional burden that most people aren't aware of.
Yeah, like like I in the least weird sounding way I could possibly say this, I think about the kids a lot.
Yeah.
Like when I'm so
no, it makes sense.
Yeah,
It makes
like,
sense.
And so it's like because I don't even live in the town that I work in. I live in Corvallis, like from Monday through Thursday for the most part. But it's like but so I'm only there one day a week usually. But it's like the things remind me, and it's like I hope they're doing okay today. Do my prayers in the morning. Pray for the kids. And so it's like I'm only there once a week, and I'm like stressed out on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, I really hope student X is acting good today. They've really been struggling lately. And I think often people don't realize like the effect that we can have, And so it always bums me out when you look at like the national budget and it's like, oh, record low education. I'm like, oh, that's sad. But it is what it is. But
do you think there's a balance too? Do you think you could take too much on of the students that
I think you absolutely can. I've talked to some teachers that have told me that sometimes you need to just
disconnect.
Like in my experience, also being a young teacher, where it's like it's like, okay, so most of the kids I work with are like 12 to 14, right? And I think this also ties into me growing up in church. Like I've been around people of every age my entire life. Like when I was born, I was around tons of adults, tons of people. And then when I was their age, I had, older kid friends. Like there were older kids that I look up to, and now we're the older kids. So it's like, but I noticed at church, like there's kids I'll walk up to, talk to them and stuff, like I'm their youth camp counselor. They're that age. I'm so used, me personally, to being around kids because of church.
Yeah.
And like, it's not weird for me to be talking at church as a 20-year-old with a 14-year-old. That's not weird because we've all, for the most part, it's a community. We've all grown up together. So it's like, I feel like I kind of have carried that over where it's like, I'm still an adult. I'm still the teacher. I'm still an authority figure. But it's like, I'm very comfortable just eating lunch with the kids, talking about sports, right? Talking about whatever. And so I have noticed like, there have been times where there's a student that's really acting out and I'm just like, man, like I cannot believe again that they got suspended again. Like, are you kidding me? Like, man, I want them to succeed. And it's like, it's coming from a place of care.
Yeah.
But there are times, I think it happens a lot with young teachers. And I mean, myself included, and I've just seen other young teachers and have been told this by older teachers, like, oh, you're going through that when you first start out where you care. Not that you stop caring, but you care so much that it just stresses you out.
And maybe there's a balance of knowing what to care for and what to recognize you don't have control over.
Yeah.
Because there is a truth that you want to show that you care for these kids, but there's truth that most of the things that could potentially change the biggest impacts in their life aren't in your control.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm not going to be able to control if their parents stay together.
No.
I'm not going to be able to control where they're sleeping at night,
You can't fill that role.
Yeah.
You can't fill a parental role.
Yeah.
You can give them a role model, and you could demonstrate how to act, but they still go back home to the same place. And
Yeah, exactly.
And you have a limited amount of time where you're with them. And I think that can create a lot of pressure even on teachers, which maybe there's a balance. And there is something to the fact that I guess as you age and as you said it, it seems that you might gain wisdom and recognize that you can't control any of this. So why add pressure to your life when you don't need to? Because that can just cause you more stress. And then there is a balance, because you don't want to be completely heartless and you don't care. Yeah. But you also know that you can't take on the burdens of each child, because then you can't handle that either. Humans aren't really meant to do that either.
Yeah. I feel like that relates to, like, like a lot of jobs. I mean, there are a lot of jobs.
Sure.
I mean, not a lot of jobs are working with kids, but the ones that are, like, working with kids or even just working with other people, like, I think, or like a lot of bosses, I'm sure, feel this way, where it's like they might take on the stresses of their employees. And it's like, like, I mean, I've talked to people who are business owners and stuff, and they'll tell me, like, the hardest thing, going more broad, like outside of school and just in general, like when you are an authority figure to another human being, or like you're someone that they look to for guidance or advice in any situation, I think you are always going to need to find a personal balance of, like, okay, how much time can I dedicate to care? Because, like, I've talked to business owners, like people from church, a lot of people in our church are business owners, and I'll talk to them about that kind of stuff, and they're just like, well, the hardest thing is when an employee, like, is going through something, and it's like, I want to be there for them,
but I also need to consider
like my perspective, but which I can't even imagine doing that with, like, a full-blown adult. At least with a kid, the problems are more often than not, oh, I failed my math test, or oh, I forgot my phone charger today, more often than not, versus adults where it's like, might be like, a much bigger deal.
Yes.
But yeah.
And I guess there's a balance to that too. And I guess that's the whole fact of leadership, that often when you get paid more for leadership, you're taking on a lot more pressure than just doing your job and being told what to do. Because it's more than just, it takes a certain type of character to to lead other people, because for one, you have to be the type of person people want to lead and people want to follow, but also it takes a ability to withdraw, that you have to recognize, I don't have a true impact on these people, and I just have to recognize that this is reality. And I feel bad that it's this case, but we also have all these other employees that if this job needs to be completed, and if there's a disconnect that you have to have, and that can be extremely difficult. And I can even understand how that could even be a lot of pressure too in that same case. And I guess teachers are kind of on that same level, but of course teachers are not going to be able to be paid the same as each CEO would be paid. Or
just the way the world is. Yeah.
And it's one of those things where there's not, you don't know completely the balance that can be done, but currently I guess there is some form of balance, and there's a pressure that maybe that's the one thing that with time teachers will end up doing, is they add the wisdom that also CEOs or these people who in leadership roles add that wisdom to their life too. And maybe in reality, when people who are CEOs or leaders, they already have that wisdom because they're older. The teachers can start out early, and then they gain that with time, where maybe it takes that wisdom to become a higher leader role, which is interesting that you could see that pairing, where to get that role, you're supposed to have the wisdom. And as a teacher, often you're going to gain that wisdom with time, which is, I guess there's that balance that most people wouldn't be aware of unless they were in that environment. And it's even interesting hearing it, because it's like, oh yeah, it all makes sense. But of course I'm not in that presence. I was always the student. I was always the one that would see the other students struggling, but I wouldn't take it on as my own burden. And clearly all these other teachers would. And now it even gives grace when I would remember the teachers that would have struggles or seemed that like they were overwhelmed, or maybe they just had to disconnect from the amount of stress they were. And then you're not even considering if any of these teachers are also having stresses in their own life that are outside of school.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's why so many people quit during COVID. Like the only reason why I'm even a sub is because of COVID and the teaching shortage. Like I'm on an emergency. Like technically, pre-COVID, you had to have, at least in Oregon, you had to have a bachelor's degree. Didn't have to be in anything specific, but you had to have a bachelor's degree to be a substitute. And they suspended that because they had so many teachers quit after 2020 and the 2020-2021 school year. They had so many teachers quit, so many teachers opt into early retirement, pursue different careers or take an indefinite leave of absence, that they were just so desperate that they were bringing in anybody. And you think about it because it's like, okay, all these kids are coming in, like looking at like now. So it's like, okay, these kids are coming in. They just spent, depending on what state you live in, a year or up to at the very minimum at least a few months away at home, dealing with the stresses of like, your parents might be telling you one thing, your parents might be telling you, don't leave the house, like parents, and some kids are being told that you can do whatever. So it's like the kids were at a large variety of stress at home related to the COVID and that kind of stuff. And when they started coming back to school, then you had the teachers who they might have, they had a general sense of stressor plus all the stuff that COVID threw on. I think you just had so many teachers quitting. And now that it's been a few years, now we're in the 2023 school year, we're a couple years removed now from like forced online school and that kind of stuff. And it's getting better. Like, I don't think they're going to renew the emergency license next year, which I'm okay with. Like, I'll do something else. And then, but also I think it's a sign in general that, oh, well, if we don't need it, that's a good thing. Cause that means we're fully staffed. And so it's like, I feel like teachers like coming in, like, I mean, there's been times like, especially being a college student where it's like Thursday, because I usually drive up Friday morning. I get up really early and drive right to work, about an hour and a half. And so I'll go to bed Thursday night and I just maybe had like a horrible week. Like I'm behind on assignments. I'm stressed out. There's something going on. And then you come back and then you got to show up with a smile. And it's like, okay, I can't let any of these kids know that I'm having like, and there were times in my school experience where I would show up and the teacher would point blank tell us like, hey, I'm having a rough week. Like, can we just read a book today? Could we just tune out, take notes? There were a couple times in my experience where I did have a teacher that was brutally honest with us to say, hey, we're going to just kind of take today off. You can't do that a lot, obviously. But, there were times when I show up to work and I'm like very stressed out about something or whatever, and you do have to just turn it off. And I think, a lot of times the kids maybe don't realize that. I think you get pretty good at hiding it. Sure. Like I'll get pretty good at hiding it when I'm stressed out.
Is there a balance? Is there a level that... Because I see both where it's important that you don't take on, and maybe you do find the balance, because I would think there's an importance that you don't put pressure on students to take on the burden of the teacher, but you also know that the teachers have to make sure that they're not getting overworked or overstressed too, because if a teacher reaches burnout, they can't just take a long sabbatical. There's no break in that way, so you have to consider the reality of the situation in that time, which is interesting that there is that separation between the two different people, and it's interesting how that overplays.
I think it's just an individual basis. I've seen some coworkers be able to do it every day. They've never missed a day. And then I don't have any coworkers who have broke down. And if I did, I wouldn't tell them. If I would, I wouldn't say. But I haven't. Yeah. But there were times in my K-12 experience, like where a teacher would, obviously the obvious one is a teacher gets pregnant. They have to have a long-term sub come in. Yeah. But there weren't that many times. There weren't much other times where a teacher just disappeared without knowledge. Like that never really happened. So it's like that doesn't. I'm sure there are situations where a teacher does get really just burnt out and they have a long-term sub come in. But for the most part, you can't really do that. You can't just leave the middle of school year. Like you might be able to apply for like a leave of absence the next school year, but you got to do that way in advance. Like let's say I was a regular teacher, been teaching for years, and I was just so burnt out and I needed next year off. I would have had to start applying for that like 3 months ago. Like in January, December is when I would have needed to have applied to get like a year sabbatical, because they had to spend a lot, like to get a sub that's qualified for an entire year. They want you to give like almost 8 months, like 6 to 8 months, which is sometimes you might not have that much advance. You might not know 8 months in advance that you're going to need to take the next year off, and then also you're also not getting paid for an entire year. Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Well,
You know?
even the fact is you are also thinking about yourself in 8 months, and you're like, will I be in a different place mentally where I don't need to consider taking a break? And that even takes some self-awareness that maybe if you're in that situation, I don't know if you do have the self-awareness.
Yeah. I would definitely, because then it's like, I've never done it, but it's like, I
Yeah.
wonder, like, well, what point can you go back on it? Like, let's say 8 months in advance, you say, okay, I'm taking the next school year off. I need it. And then 6 months later, you're 2 months away. You say, oh, never mind. But then they've already got a person signed on to work your job for a whole year. And like, for the people who don't know this, long-term subs get benefits. Like if you're just a regular sub, you're popping in wherever, you get paid flat rate. That's it. If you're a long-term sub, you get like dental, everything. Like, at least in Oregon, you get benefits and you get increased pay. So it's like, that's a desirable job, like it take an entire year of steady increased pay and benefits. Like, and then you would know, well, if I want to come back, I'm not taking that away from somebody. And yeah, it's my job, but I did say I wanted a year off,
Yeah.
And that could be difficult versus like maybe another, like other jobs where it's like you are maybe a little more able to say, hey, I need a week. I'm just gonna take a staycation, It's much harder to do that with jobs where, and I would say any job where you're working with children, or if it's like a daycare center or like anything where people are relying on you, it's much harder to like take. So you're just going to have that added stress onto it. And then a lot of those jobs, you're taking on the stress, like you were saying, taking on the stress of children, and like, what's the balance between that? And I feel like it's just a personal, a personal thing. Like, everyone's going to be different in what they feel like they can take and what they can handle versus compared to like what type of job you're having, and what your experience is with like self-managing, like, okay, this is work time, this is personal time. And I would say, in my opinion, I think a lot of people, at least that I know, do kind of struggle with that, with like allowing themselves to have 2 hours in the afternoon to just watch TV or, read a book, because, they feel like, oh, I can't do that. I can't give myself free time because I have so much in my mind, I think that is a difficult thing to do with like just anybody, any job, and anything that you do, like managing personal time versus work time, and like giving yourself like a cutoff, like, okay, at 5:00, I'm not thinking about work anymore. If you have a job that you are able to do that, But yeah, I think that's always the personal struggle that people are going to have, is like managing, like, what you want to do. You might have like a side hustle you want to do, and then it's like you work an 8-hour day, come home, and then you got to do that. And then it's like, well, when does there time for me? When is there time for me to just reflect, sit, drink a glass of water, But yeah.
I guess there is a stress that, and maybe in some sense, I guess, is that what adulting and life in general is too, where everyone has, and maybe there's a lot of pressure, but I guess you could probably see other jobs that have that. Well, I know sometimes even leadership roles will have that stress where you're like, I can't really take the time off, and maybe I need it, but what can you do? And maybe that's just the fact that when you were a child, you felt like you had that time where you could just take it off. There wasn't that pressure. And maybe now you start to recognize the reality that that's not really what life is. Yeah. And it can't be. And maybe that's pressure that humans don't need, but that's the pressure we live in.
What it is, yeah. Well, like with you, like with engineering and that kind of stuff, like, I mean, like, I don't know much about like what like a daily routine and like that, like not talking about school, but like once you're in the workforce, like I don't know much of like how that job works or looks, but like is that the type of job where you think you can come home at 5:30 and just turn it off? Yeah,
that would be of a job. I would imagine it would be more that way. If anything, you would be thinking about how you could finish a task. It wouldn't be really thinking about the people. And I would more have the incentive of, I don't really want to continue thinking about it unless I'm quote unquote getting paid to be the person that has to. Like if I'm getting, and that would be considered more leadership, if I'm getting paid to know that I need to solve this. But if I'm just coming there and I'm like, yeah, I have tasks, but I'll do them when I'm at work and I'll deal with it there. I think my mindset would be different for the job, and where I know that I would have the ability to take on that responsibility. But if I'm not getting paid, or if I'm not being considered for that role, then that's not the responsibility I want to put pressure on myself for, especially because most people won't put that pressure, and that sounds just more exhausting. Yeah. I think that it would be a more disconnecting role more for the fact that I think it's also related to source of fulfillment, because you helping students probably brings the more fulfillment. Yeah, you're interested in the topic that you're teaching, but that's not really why you're doing it. You're doing it more because you want to see these children as they grow, and also these kids as they develop, and you know that you're there to help and guide them. Where I want to create, it's more the thought that I'm creating technology that can be used to develop. And it wouldn't directly relate to education, but if whatever I'd be doing, if like, oh, okay, you could create planes, then you're then meaning that you're producing technology that other people are going to be able to use, and then it's going to become more accessible to a wider amount of people, because now it might be cheaper to fly. If you're creating, I know if people do like HVAC, or if they do these type of technologies that, you know, you're instigating and you're helping a community, and you might not directly see it, you're getting fulfillment by creating it, because I also get there's a sense of fulfillment from the creation of it, but there's not as much of a pressure to relate to the people that I am making it for. I get the fulfillment knowing that they're going to get to appreciate the technology I made, and that's kind of broad in the sense that I can do anything related to that. And I almost do, and I do recognize, I feel like there's it's not as much pressure, and maybe that it might even be somewhat intentional, that then I don't have to take on the pressures of other people, and other people can be overwhelming, and you can choose the people you truly care for, because I would imagine it would be difficult to disconnect, to say I want to think about these people and care about their futures, and that would eventually be exhausting, and I don't know if I'd personally in this time want to take on that pressure, because that just sounds like a lot of, and then you do have to find out where's that wisdom, and then you're intentionally choosing, I can't take on this pressure, and I'm okay with that. And that sounds more exhausting, and almost I would wonder if it would be disappointing. Maybe it's just someone like me, I would feel like I would end up feeling disappointed that I'm choosing not to consider these kids, and maybe in the first place that's why I wouldn't do it, because I don't have I'm going to care about my kids, but I'm not going to ever care the same way for these other kids, and I don't know if I could quite take on that responsibility myself, because I don't know if I would have the patience to deal with that too. And I would guess there's a lot of patience necessary. And I think it's kind of that balance, when that's what the reason why certain people take on certain jobs. I think that there's a sense where some apply to certain people and some apply to other people, if that makes sense, where I don't, it does really depend on the person and on their motivations and what they desire to accomplish. Because that's really that's why people do what they do. It's what you want to see, the change you want to see. And if you want to see the direct change, then it might mean that you're going into something like teaching, or you're going into roles where you'll directly see the change that you're causing. And I would say that I would probably more have the sense of fulfillment also knowing that I'm creating something that I'm not getting to see it directly, but I know it's causing a benefit in other communities, although I can't see it. And maybe that's more of also that I know I'm going to enjoy creating the new things, because I also have fascinations in new technologies that just sound interesting, and not everyone has that interest either. For sure. And that might be even why engineering is interesting too. If that makes sense.
That makes sense. It might have been a
little bit of a ramble, but it's kind of like related. It all kind of relates to desires and intentions of why people choose the jobs they choose. Because I think that's really that's how you gain fulfillment when you work. It's the fact of, I'm doing this to accomplish or help these people, and that's really where it all will come from, because that's really why people do what they do.
I mean, I don't want to misquote. I'm pretty sure MLK said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." I know that's I know it's a famous quote. I'm pretty sure it was MLK who said that. And I think that is very true. I mean, I think about that a lot. You know, like when I think especially with Rao, because like just being blunt, it is the dumpiest school in the district. Sure. Like the other middle schools are really nice. Not every middle school, but they're at the bare minimum they're nicer to some extent, where it's like I'll walk in and I'm like, this is a breathtaking, beautiful mansion, and we have 5 main hallways. It's just like strip, hallway. And then there's some schools where it's like, it's humongous, glorious windows, everything, right? And so the students will ask me like, Austin, like so you work for the district, right? Like you don't work for Round. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, why do you come back to this dump? And I'm like, and I quote, be the
Yeah.
change you want to see in the world to kids all the time. Cause I'm
Yeah.
like, I love this school and I want to help make it better. And a lot of times they're just like, oh, pff, whatever. Why don't you work at Happy Valley? That place is beautiful. And it's like, well, I don't want to work there. I want to work here.
Sure.
You know, you want to see like the fruits of your labor. And 'cause I was kind of thinking while you were talking, like about tying it kind of back into what we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit with AI and that kind of stuff is like, where it's like you want to see the fruits of your labor, you want to see like the product, like with you with engineering, like you're saying like you're really fascinated with like new technologies and like that kind of stuff, and you can maybe see fulfillment in knowing that you helped make something that did benefit people's lives and that kind of stuff. But what I'm curious about is like I know people talk a lot about like oh, it's gonna take jobs away, and like it's gonna
Sure.
pretty soon it's gonna be only self checkout, and every fast food place
Yeah.
is gonna be kiosk only and stuff. And I think that I don't know if we ever will go that far, but I do wonder like if you're someone who works a job, right? And I think this ties back into what we were talking about earlier. We were saying like teachers using AI to help, like with lesson planning, that kind of stuff. Like, at what point? And this could be an existential question you could possibly never answer. Like, at what point is it you're doing? Like, at what point are you the person who did the thing? Or, and you could dive kind of even further back into teaching. Like, okay, if I'm reading off a lesson plan, you know, how much, like, you want to put your personal touch to it. Like, you don't want to just, I mean, I know in university, a lot of times they're just reading off slides, but that's different, you know, like, because a lot, typically, if you're going to university, you've received a high school education, you know some basic stuff, versus in growing up, you're going to need to be, okay, you can't just read off a book. You need to give a little more insight into, okay, this is why this thing works this way. Maybe give a visual aid. And I'm just curious. I wonder, like, as technology does continue to advance, and you could talk about with teaching as technology advances. Maybe having things like Khan Academy and that kind of stuff. Like, did your teachers ever use Khan Academy?
I don't think teachers ever did. I may have looked it up and had the resource myself.
And so it's like I wonder, like, okay, like, what is a balance with like using stuff like Khan Academy, using Bill Nye the Science Guy, a video for teaching, okay, well, how much am I actually doing? But then you tie it into like a larger theme of like jobs in general, like as AI does develop and like technology does, and even your field, like as technology continues to advance further and further and further, I wonder at what point maybe will we hit a stop where it's like, okay, we're almost not even doing anything anymore.
Sure.
And then it's like a CEO might be like, oh, well, I can save a lot of money if I just make a program do it. And I know people have debated, like, should we make laws that prohibit companies from computerizing tasks because it does lead to job loss. But then it's like, okay, well, it's a free country. If I'm a CEO and I want to automate everything, it's my right to do that, And I'm very curious in the next like 15, 20 years to see because stuff is boomed. Yeah. Like even like I know like the voice changing AI is really popular right now, And even in the last few months, I've seen it get better and better. Like, I know people use it for memes, and like it's fun to see Obama and Trump play Call of Duty together. And it's like in December, didn't sound a whole lot like them. In March, they sound a lot like the real people,
Yeah.
And so it's like, I just think as stuff just rapidly evolves, I'm really curious as to see if we hit a cutoff point where world leaders are like, you can't do this anymore.
Sure. Well, there's some. You gave a lot to so
yeah, I did kind of ramble, but
no, I'm more meaning I'm gonna have a nice lengthy answer probably too. So, to start, one thing that humans are, I would say, very good at is being innovative and creating new things. And there's roles that were taken away. Well, if you have to consider, like humans, with the fact that if we create new technologies, I think there is a truth that we will adapt and new roles will be necessary within the roles that we have now. And you consider, let's say, when cars were created, and then you had roles of like stagecoaches, these things that would transport things. And you still have some of that where people drive things around, but it's not needed as frequently. You don't need trains. Took away responsibilities of different forms of travel, and then you only needed one conductor, a crew, rather than needing a bunch of technology to take things across the country, and that would take a lot of work too. Where I think And then, but they would be replaced where they would need now to have trained technicians, and you need to have these
Mhm.
people would need to learn new skills in the world as it developed.
Hmm.
And I do think that there's a truth that if we create that technology, the world's going to have to change. And I recognize maybe people aren't in the mindset to become, let's say if we do automate everything, maybe currently people don't have the brain capacity. Not brain capacity is the wrong word, but I would say people don't have the know-how to know how to become a computer scientist for everyone right now. But I will say people will adapt in the next generation. Parents will raise their kids knowing that this is the world you're living in now.
Mhm.
And now you have a bunch of people going into computer science because of now you
Yeah.
see companies like Apple, Google, who have developed these
Yeah.
technologies. Even you see Facebook, Meta, these things that are now
Mhm.
that this is the world you live in. So now
Mhm.
you're going to look at computer science as a whole new field that actually can potentially offer a lot of opportunities.
Mhm.
And it means that, yes, maybe the parents don't have the same incentives and life has changed for them. But I do think that you raise your children in the way that you know that they're going to take on the responsibilities and the changes, and they're
Mhm.
going to be okay. Where I think that, and I do recognize, I think that's how it changes. People would see the new technologies form, and they wouldn't know what to do with them.
Mhm.
Printing presses, when that became, you took away all the people who had to go and transcribe all
Mhm.
the books or whatever was taking place there, and it became so much more efficient. And it did take away those type of roles, but people would adapt and they would take on new roles, and that may mean that it's future generations doing it. And I think that if that same
Mhm.
thing happens with automation, it's going to just have to cause people to change
Mhm.
the roles that they are taking on. And there might be new things that, well, even if you recognize if something is done by automation, often that type of role for a human is very repetitive.
Mhm.
If that's
Yeah.
the way that it happened, there may be more valuable things for that human to be able to do that something automated couldn't do.
Yeah.
And that's some research that I've done before, where some tasks that, or even some forms of creativity that we have seen some new forms of AI that have created art and things like that.
Yeah.
But there is some truth. Humans seem to be the most connected to things that are
Mhm.
that are made by other humans. Even if you see like, oh, that was made by AI,
Yeah.
people relate almost more because they know that it's a human experience that they relate to
Yeah.
with other humans. And that might mean the roles that are more repetitive are going to be the people that are going to they may have to switch to something, but
Mhm.
I don't think there's going to be a I think it's going to be a change. I think,
Yeah.
and that's what's going to be necessary. And that's what's hard for people. People don't
Mhm.
like the change, but they might be forced into it.
Yeah.
And worst case scenario, maybe they won't change, but their future kids and generations, the parents are not going to be so stubborn to teach
Mhm.
their kids, you're still going to do this role even though it's not applicable
Yeah.
anymore. They're going to recognize, oh, I want you to have a better life than I did, so I'm going to have you go, if it
Mhm.
be you go to college for this thing, or if
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you you don't actually have to learn this. And because there's technologies that have changed, and I guess even some of the big ones were like where they used to, even like where the big forms of income used to be people farming,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden that became more automated,
Yeah.
and or it was purchased by big companies and they would just do it on mass scales,
Mhm.
where you would take away the small independent person, and then those small people would then move to big cities and they would
Yeah.
start doing work there. And it was a change that ended up needing to be
Mhm.
necessary, and it was reality. And I do recognize it's like it's disappointing. And I remember like, oh, you'd watch Little House on the Prairie,
Yeah.
and like they would be Paul would be his job was he would go out and he would
Yeah.
do farming, and then
Mhm.
you would see the inconsistency there that may actually be better and more productive
Mhm.
from a giant company, because there's not much. It's not as risky for us them, because the small, it's very risky for someone
Mhm.
who's relying on that.
Yeah.
And then they would go and they would have a steady job that they would go and do in the city, and that was just reality that had to
Mhm.
change. And I think we may be in the same situation where
Mhm.
we might be at another shift like that,
Yeah, for sure.
and people will probably humans have to adjust,
adapt,
and that's what
yeah.
happens. We adapt, and I think of course it's brand new. No one, we were never around when that happened,
Yeah.
but you can look back and you can see similar situations,
Mhm.
and it's hard for us to relate to that,
Yeah.
but I think it is quite similar
Mhm.
that those roles were taken and people would adapt. And I think the big difference is right now people don't know the roles that are going to be created,
That's true. Yeah.
and you look back and you're able to see what they ended up doing. And we don't actually know, and we may not actually know till it starts coming. Like we're like,
Yeah.
oh wow, this is doing this, and now there's this new thing that's able to happen that we didn't know that would actually be needing to happen. So now we'll let this take place. It's almost like that role got replaced and we created something we didn't know we needed. And that's probably how it's going to be. Yeah, there's some uncertainty, but we can't stop the change. That's just the reality of it. If that makes sense, where I think it's it's repeated, it's happened throughout history, and it might just be the reality of the situation. And I think I don't have a fear for humans, because even I recognize even the stuff that I'm doing will have the ability to be taken over by by AI if they need to start designing stuff. Well, we already have become more reliant on computers, where all the engineering I'm learning actually isn't as very much applicable, because it's never done by hand anymore. I'm doing everything by hand, but by hand is so inconsistent, and you can't trust yourself to do that. We plug it into a computer which does far more iterations and processes, and then we know that we can trust it because it's not going to make a mistake. Yeah. And we can't have that same, and so meaning that engineering has changed, but we still have the engineers who are on top of it looking at it, and maybe eventually AI will be able to do that. And then I just will have to switch my role, and I'll have to find something new. But at least I'll know that what I was doing was taken over in a good place. And there's always going to be roles of the humans who are there. And then I could see myself then in that situation knowing like, okay, if my role is gone, then I could learn some forms of computer science, and I could learn some stuff there where I can understand that technology. And humans, I doubt you're ever going to see. It would be entertaining to watch two robots interact, but even you say like podcasting and those things, people aren't going to be as eager. I think I heard it related to chess in a podcast where people would go against chess bots, and it would be interesting. You would see I forget the world champion, I forget his name, Kasparov. And he was it was not current, it was in the past, where he went and he played against a AI and he lost. And it was the first time where like people were like, oh, it's going to go away. Chess is going to go away because now AI and robots, not robots, but you know what I mean. These like systems, chess bots, these chess bots are better than humans. And now you look at it, and chess is probably more popular than it was before. You also recognize that. But there's a truth. People aren't going to go and look at two chess bots playing. And I did hear about it. If two chess bots play against each other, it's going to end in a draw because both of them are going to play perfect moves, and there's no way one will win. It's only going to end in draws. Interesting. So in reality, it's not going to be entertaining to watch that. You like the fact that humans may make a mistake. The human element, and if humans make a mistake, someone could win. And if it ends in a draw, both of them just played a perfect game, and you have more respect for it, where you don't have that respect for AI because they're just following, this is the next move in the iteration that's going to create the best outcome. And humans being able to think about that in the future, you give a respect for that. And in that same case, I don't think the role of conversations, you can look at Chat GBT, these things that come out there, but I don't think it's going to take away the human element that people relate to and connect with. I think that's always going to be there. And I think that's because people are, at least currently, and maybe I'm speaking for my own generation, we're not going to get the same connection or fulfillment with AI. Yeah, I agree. Even a role like a friend, in that time frame, that it was programmed by someone, and you're just interacting with something that's reacting in the way that it's told to act. Yeah, like it's just like, at least with me, like I feel like, I know they have like chatbots and stuff, and it's like, if you could program something to just agree with me, and I knew that it was, I feel like I would get bored immediately. And like an example I thought of when you brought up the chess bot thing is like, so every year, EA does a Madden Super Bowl the day before the real Super Bowl, where they just simulate it. Sure. And I think sometimes they've brought in like, they'll have like two real players play it, but there's them before, well, they will simulate the entire game, and I do not care. And I don't personally know anybody who watches that. I see it every year. I see it posted, oh, the EA Super Bowl, the Madden Super Bowl sim, you can watch the full stream or watch the full VOD afterward, and they had this team winning by 4. And it's like, I don't care. I don't know anybody who cares about that. But people watch the regular one because it's more there's a human element. I think you're right. I think the human element will never go away. It's like, I do not care I'm a huge sports fan. I don't care whatsoever who wins the Madden Super Bowl simulation.
because when they win, it's the same celebration they've had for 7 games, or the confetti comes down, they hold up the trophy. It's like, oh, cool. The computer said that they were going to win. But watching the actual one where I know that there's a chance that
there could be an upset.
They're going to be crying afterward. They're going to be hugging their kids, hugging their wives. They're going to be like celebrating the win. Yeah. And also, and this is, you could say is a bad thing, like there's more of a chance for injury. There's more of a chance for like random things to happen.
Yes.
So it's like, I do not care whatsoever with the Madden Super Bowl, but it's like, I'll totally watch the first, I'll eat it up, because most people in America at least are around, or at least in a house with Super Bowl playing in the background,
Sure.
And so it's like, that's one example. Then to tie it kind of back into more of like a grand scheme of things, like I think you said in the beginning, like a lot of the stuff that is being replaced is considered like monotonous and that kind of stuff, right? So it's like, okay, you could say, I think some people might support let's say for example, a fully automated Taco Bell that you knew for 100% fact was never going to mess up your order. I think there would be a lot of people that would be in support of that. Like, oh, if I knew that I could if I could pull up to the drive-thru and order a 5-layer burrito with no sour cream, I knew 100% that I was getting a proper portion of ingredients and I was getting no sour cream. But then when I went to Taco Bell, there were plenty of people that didn't like it. That didn't like the kiosks and stuff. Like, there was maybe more of a chance, there wasn't a robot making it, but when we're talking the drive-thru, there's the human element of, I might hear you wrong. And that can be annoying. Absolutely. But I know some people, so we were actually told when they first brought the kiosks in, we were supposed to, and I never really did this. My boss was pretty chill. But when like the regional boss would come in, she would say, okay, and whenever this is before COVID, when the lobby was still open, she would say, okay, whenever a customer comes up, you have to recommend the kiosk. No matter what, you better, before you even say, you could say, hey, have a nice day, welcome to Taco Bell. Would you like to try our kiosk? And if they said no, then I could start taking their order. And I was like, what? And then the first day that we did that, she was there and she was watching. And so I had to do it. And people hate it. They're like, I don't want to use that. And I was like, oh, okay. And then at my break, she was like, Austin, she's like, you're not pushing the kiosks enough. I was like, people don't want to do the kiosks. I was like, people don't like, yes, there is a higher chance of your order being accurate. But like people like, some people like to just show up. They don't want to talk to anybody. Punch their order, go. But I found that a lot of people did not want to do it. Like, oh, I kind of like the small talk. I like the element of, hey, you guys busy today? Or I always would try and ask them, how's your day going? Or it's nice outside today. And I think most people, or I don't say most, a lot of people appreciate that. There are people who are very introverted who who would rather just show up, type in the kiosk, get their order, and leave. That's totally fine. That's why I like that. I think it's nice that we have that kind of stuff, like that we have automated some of the more monotonous things. Like, I think it's nice that fast food isn't, for the most part, it's not fully human run anymore. But I also think that it's nice that it's not fully automated, because I think a lot of people do appreciate the how's your day going, the have a nice day. And I think that people, that will never, I don't think that will ever go away.
It's true. It's true. It's interesting, even the fact that you could even see the differences in personalities and everything there too, where certain people will want to and certain people will feel that. Because I probably would be the person who would want to go to the kiosk, because I'm like, I don't need to have some small talk interaction with people if I could just type it in quickly and get it. But I also know that I could see the appreciation where people would be able to have a connection with someone that they haven't interacted with before. And maybe there's almost some form of not anxiety, but like this anticipation, because you don't really know what to expect. But you're like, at least I know that I'll get my food and I might have an interesting interaction. And often some people will then see it as they have a story that they can tell too. And which is interesting that that's what we want. We want to have connections and stories we can go on and share with other people that we think is interesting. And maybe it's just ourselves just finding something funny, but that's, I guess, the human connection, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, I think people crave that. I mean, like, tying it back, like you guys talked about in the first episode, like, there are people who rebuild their energy off of being alone. But I think ultimately, most people are always going to be craving connection, even if it's just one person. Some people are completely satisfied with just one or two solid friends, and that's awesome. And it's like, but I don't personally know anybody that I can think of right now that will flat out tell me, and telling the truth, I do not have friends and I don't want any.
That's
like
that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, like,
people there is a difference in the amount of friends, but in reality, most people, they might have a lot of acquaintances, but you will really only have 2, 3. If you will only have a few true friends where you can like ride to die with them.
Yep.
Like
The inner circle and the outer circle.
And it's like it's these people that you're always there with, but most people, because in reality, if you're a friend of many, the term, the quote, if the saying, if you're a friend of many, you're probably a friend of none.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be the one that gets the call that everyone's going to be like, oh, hey there, hey Ethan.
Yeah.
And then, but in reality, no one is going to call you if there's a problem, if they need some support, if something's going on. They don't have that same trust. You're just someone in their life that they are comfortable with. But it doesn't, and that's not as fulfilling.
Yeah.
And that can almost be disappointing too for people.
Yeah. So I think that we need acquaintances. Like I like that there are again, most people people in my life, it's like, oh, you have a baby? Oh, it's awesome, man. I'll like the post. I might comment, congrats, like, and I think I like having people where I like knowing that I have people where I can have a conversation with them if the situation comes to be. But then it's like using the baby example, right? If I'm scrolling through Facebook and I see that someone I went to high school with had a baby, comment, congrats, like the post, whatever. And then there's some people where it's like they have a baby, I'm going to call them and be like, I'm coming over, when can I come over and see the baby? I'm so happy for you. I'm buying you a gift. I'm taking you out for breakfast. Like, and and it's like and that stuff, like, it's like one of my best friends, he has an almost 2-year-old. And so I was like, and I met him at Taco Bell. And so there were plenty of people who I went to high school with, not plenty. There are people who I went to high school with and who I didn't go to high school with, but I was around during a high school age that have had kids. And I've shot some congratulations texts, I've commented, oh, congrats on the baby. But I've only had, and also we're young, most people aren't having kids at our age. Yeah. But there's only been one friend who had a baby where I was like, dude, like when am I allowed to come over and see the baby? Congrats, man. I'm so happy for you. I buy the kid presents on his birthday, that kind of stuff. So it's like there's the inner circle and the small circle. People are always going to be like, I love the moments of like when it is like a smaller gathering where it's like, me and you have had plenty of shared experiences where we're in a small group of people and we have we have a heart to heart. We have like a deep conversation.
It's almost more fulfilling.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it's not almost. I would say it is more fulfilling.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Than just the small, like, oh, let's get together and hang out where.
Yeah.
And sometimes that it almost has to have the incentive that you're not planning on doing that. And then it's more just like, oh, it just happens. And you're like, oh, hey, we just did that. And I really enjoyed it. Where there's also a balance where you can also have the mindset where you're going to. But that's where people will feel fulfillment. It's where they know that they're having a genuine connection with someone else that wants to have that connection. And you can't have that with AI.
Yeah, for sure. Like, there's going to be some Friday nights where I'm totally down to go to Spaghetti Factory with 12 people and have just a big group conversation. And then there's some nights where I'm like, man, I would love nothing more than to just hang out with 3 people and just sit on the couch and talk. And like you said, like that's never gonna go away. Like, I mean, even with like online only friends, like I have some friends where I have never met in real life. I only know them through the internet, and I've talked to some of my online friends, and I've had some deep conversations before. They're going through something. I'll shoot them. We'll text, we'll FaceTime. Like, hey, I'm here for you. But it's like, and there's some online friends. I've been friends with them for 3-4 years, and I have never met them, and probably never will. But there is a limit. Like, there are some things that I just, even like my closest friend who I have never met in person, it is just not quite the same with like, even maybe a friend of like let's say there's someone who I've known my whole life that I would maybe consider like, I don't think most people have a best friends ranking list, but maybe a little lower. But I'm way more comfortable talking to them about a problem I'm having than, let's say, my friend who I might consider a better friend, but I don't see them. I'm not there, Like, it's like some people like are having a really hard day, call my friend on the phone and say, hey, can you just come over and just like hang out with me, You can't do that with a robot, and you can't do that with someone who you've never really met in life before, There's all like having someone physically there, I think is something that you, even on FaceTime, like, like it's there, well, I mean, you like long distance relationships. Like, I mean, like long distance relationships often don't work out because there is just an element of like FaceTime is just not the same as having you sitting right next to me, you know? And that, and for any circumstance, I feel like generally speaking, you can never match that.
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, it's even interesting because if you relate it, a lot of that is also due to the fact that, you know, they're giving up time for you and they care enough to give up that time. An AI is going to be there if you're there, if you need them or not.
Yeah.
They're a system that they can be anywhere, and it's in that same sense but I wouldn't give them sentience. But at least I don't want to give them, maybe, I don't know if they're would ever have an awareness of stuff. And that truth where I feel like, and that's where a line where I don't really know if they'll have awareness in that way. And it's hard for me to imagine them having it, even in the sense where they're like, I do think when I listen to podcasts where they're almost having this hopeful desire that'll happen, they're being too hopeful because they're in that environment where they're like, this is what we want to accomplish. Yeah. This is where we want to be. And it's not realistic. Most of these things won't, some of this is related to a human experience that even other animals, they just act on their instinct. And Marcus and I talked about that a little bit too, where they act on this instinct that they are just following. They're not making the conscious decision to do this. They're just following the instinct.
Like most animals follow the alpha.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, the alpha, or even what you would say their program, what they're supposed to do, they don't know they're making the decision. They just
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Where they're just in the situation where I'm going to run from this. I'm the prey, and I'm going to run from the predator who's chasing me because I have to, because I want to live, and that's what I have to do. And it's almost more this instinctive nature. Yeah. And these traits that they don't need to be taught. I want to live because I have so much fulfillment in my life. No, I don't think so. Yeah. They don't have that incentive. Yeah. And there's that truth that most of these situations are based in a human experience and a human reality, that AI don't lose anything in human connection. Yeah. They're not limited in that way. Even, well, often when they make the jokes about AI getting larger, or where they're like, oh, they're going to take over. AI isn't limited. If you really were to consider like the computing power of a computer, a little interaction with a measly human isn't going to take up all their time where they're feeling limited by us. They could be doing so much so much more elsewhere with the ability and the computation they have on a computer, where that doesn't actually make sense that you'd say they're losing opportunities. Humans have the experience where they're living in this single reality where they experience it and they're choosing to be here. And you're never going to feel like an AI is sacrificing for you. Yeah, because
ultimately, I mean, it has been programmed that way. I know people people think it's like scary or like weird that if you like pull your iPhone, you're talking to Siri. If you say like, "Hey Siri, shut up," it'll be like, "That's not very nice." And some people are like, "Oh my goodness, it knows that you insulted me." And it's like, okay, no, but someone it's like someone programmed. A woman came in and recorded like the voice for Siri, and it's like, and I guess you can have it be a boy or a girl, and and different like
but the
accents like stuff.
Form,
and then someone wrote in the code that when it hears shut up, it's gonna say that wasn't very nice, just to be funny. It's like, no, that's not it being aware. That's it. It's like, okay, it is aware only to the extent of it received an audio input that made the program give a specific audio output. It heard the audio input of shut up, and input of shut up, and it outputted. That wasn't very nice. Yes. Someone programmed to do that. It didn't figure that out on itself.
And that's the one thing where an AI, like even if you look at ChatGPT, it's a little farther than that, where it will listen and then it'll pull from databases and it'll collect it in a way. But all of these processes were programmed. It's reaching outside of its programming in the way that it's pulling them together in a joint way that isn't directly told how to do that. It just it's been told these are the processes and this is how humans will understand it. But it's not mentally aware that this is what it's doing. It's still a program. And that's the sense where the line where it would go from a code to all of a sudden it can start writing its own code to tell it this is how you're going to react in this situation because you reacted in this situation. Yeah. That's not how this works. It doesn't know how to do that.
I think people think that way because of movies. Like it's a very common, I mean, ever since, I don't know if I doubt The Matrix was the first movie to ever do robots taking over. I can't think of one right now earlier than The Matrix, but I know for a fact there's no way it was. But it's a huge blockbuster movie. You know, there's a trilogy. I think it's a trilogy. They made a fourth one, and people are enamored by that. And I know there's so many movies that have come out in my lifetime, even just my 20 years of life, where the principal plot, or books, games, you know, whatever, the principal plot is like robots took over or whatever. So it's like, and that's a really easy plot device. I'm not taking anything away from that kind of stuff. But like, that's a really easy plot device. Like it's so easy to just say when you're giving the background context of your story, humans were developing technology and it spiraled out of control and the AI took over. It's like, okay, well, that's really simple to say, but I don't, at least in my experience, I have never read or watched or played a game, book, or movie that had that as the plot where they explained in detail what happened. They just kind of say, it happened. And and especially in this day and age, you know, we are so surrounded by media, and like most people in the developed world watch a lot of movies, watch a lot of TV shows, play a lot of games, they read a lot of books, you know, whatever like that. And we've been so exposed to the idea of AI taking over that I feel like we almost
they have a fear. They start hearing something's developed within the field.
Like we perceive it as a given. Like it's like, people are like, oh, it's only a matter of time until AI takes over. It's like, okay, well, so far in the real world, we don't really have much or any evidence that AI will spiral out of control. We've kept it very controlled and tamed. And yes, you know, the future is untold. You know, we don't know what's going to happen in an hour. But like, I do feel like a lot of the fear comes from just Hollywood. Has made it such a trope of AI taking over that I think a lot of people just kind of expect it to happen. When there really isn't much evidence to say that that is going to happen without a doubt.
It doesn't really seem like humans are very good at predicting technologies of the future. They kind of just come. Like in a shocking way where all of a sudden you didn't expect it and it goes in a different way. Either people are almost in a sense satisfied where they are, and then and all of a sudden they get a shift where they aren't satisfied, or they're thinking about it in the future and they still are processing in a way that's not real.
I mean, we're supposed to have flying cars by now. I mean, like if you watch Back to the Future 2, that movie's set in 2016, and they had self-tying shoes, they had holographic movies, flying cars, flying skateboards, like they had all this stuff. So it's like we have gotten it right sometimes. Like I think Star Trek had FaceTime. You know, they would have video calls, and that was unthinkable that you could ever see the person you were talking to on the phone. So yeah, there have been times when Hollywood and that kind of stuff has predicted properly. Like I'm pretty sure it was Star Trek was the first major thing to have like a video call or like that idea. But then there's other times where it's like, have you ever heard of like retrofuturism? Which is like, it's like, I mean, retrofuturism has now become like an art style, but it initially started out as like people were looking at like in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, what people thought the future was going to be like. Like there's movies made in like the 50s where it's like dystopian wasteland and it's set in 1992. And it's like, okay, well, you're pretty off there. And like retrofuturism is like, now it's like an art style where it's like, you know, designing art and paintings like and what people in the past thought the future was going to look like. They weren't even close. Like if you looked at people, the way people were thinking in like the 40s and stuff, they thought we would have had flying cars and like unlimited energy sources a long time ago, and we're not even close to finding like an unlimited energy source. You know, like we're not even close to that kind of stuff. So it's like, yeah, we have gotten it right. I know people joke about The Simpsons predicts a lot of stuff. Like, yeah, we've gotten it right sometimes, but there's way more stuff where it's like we weren't even close to guessing what the future was going to be like and like what technology was going to advance. And I know that stuff has boomed since like once we split the atom. I mean, you look at like what we've accomplished in the last 60 years is insane. when you look at relative to like the first few thousand years of human life, like took us a few thousand years to figure out some basic stuff.
True.
But then now in 80 years, we've gone from no internet, phones, whatever, to like it's how the way it is now. So I feel like you just like, I don't even know what the point. I mean, yeah, it's a fun thought experiment. Oh, I wonder what this is gonna look like in 10 years.
It's almost pointless, though.
Yeah, it's like it's almost pointless.
You're not
Like,
good at it.
yeah, like what? How do you know what's good? It's gonna. I remember when the Xbox 360 was coming out, and people when they were teasing the next console, people were like, "It's gonna have 4 disk drives, and you're not even gonna have to. So there are no controllers. Everything when the Kinect came out, everyone was like, "Oh, every game is gonna be motion capture." And it's like that flamed out. That flamed out so fast. Like VR was supposed. I remember being like 12 and telling my mom, like, "Oh, Mom, in 10 years, no one's gonna play video games on TV anymore. Everything's gonna be on VR headsets." And it's like that's like a super neat. Like it came out. And it's already like a niche thing. Like VR was so hyped up for so long, and already it's become like I have a VR headset if you want to mess around with that for 30 minutes, and then you get bored because your stomach hurts and you get sick.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what the point is in being like in trying to, in a serious way, predict, because I'm like, I feel like you just can't do that, you know. But I don't know.
It's true. A lot of that is, I think we enjoy it as humans. I think there's a sense where it's like, oh, I can imagine what's going to happen, and maybe I'm going to now think that I'm ready for it. And in some sense, I don't think you're ever ready for change in that way, where you can know something is going to change, but you may just not know what it is. A lot of these things, also, a lot of the developments that have happened, there have been some key ones that were dramatic changes, but a lot of them kind of just followed the same pattern that we thought it would follow. It's just like, oh, that makes sense. I guess that was the next iteration of this process, and so clearly that's why this exists now.
Yeah,
it's more like we almost, when we try to think about the future, we try to take a step and a bound over where we are now to all the way, like, let's say you skip all these concepts here and we're brand new concepps, and usually you continue the same concepts and you might just add a new thing to it, and it will relatively get bigger, and you might phase out old concepts where that's how you get to the future. It's not going to be brand new. Things they relatively change, but you try to build it off of things we understand already, even if it is brand new technology, where it tries to keep the same simple, complex idea. And simple complex is not realistic, because it's not simple and complex. But more in the sense where it can be complex, but you look at it with simplicity, that you want to have this idea and keep the general simple parts of it together, so that you can add more complexity in other ways, where it's easier to comprehend for other people doing it. And it's easier for us to understand.
Yeah, when we look at like phones, like there's been a few huge gaps. Like, okay, when they made phones pretty flat. Oh, phones in general, okay, they're big brick phones, keypads. Then they were smaller. They still didn't have screens, but they were smaller. Then there was the huge jump of screens, but you couldn't touch them. You would use arrows. And then there was the huge jump of touchscreen. But the last few years, the biggest change they've made was a lot of phones got rid of like a physical home button. Like you don't click a button anymore; you just tap the screen. That's the last big change, and that was like 2016. I think they got rid of the home button, and now every year since then, it's just been little better camera quality. Little better camera quality. Oh, it's better when you zoom in. It's like you're doing microscopic. Like, I mean, I'm sure in 2016, people might have thought, oh man, by 2023, imagine what the iPhone's going to be like. And I'm like, the iPhone 8 isn't that different from the iPhone 14. It's just a little faster, maybe a little smaller, a little more bright colors on the screen, and maybe more pixels. The camera's better. But it's like we've already, with phones, have kind of stalled. Yeah. Like what more can you do?
Do you think we've stalled, or they would be fearful to change it because of how satisfied and how everyone has become reliant on them?
Yeah.
Because that's the one thing where I'm like, maybe they do imagine they could do some dramatic changes, but they don't really. They may fear to do the changes because if they change it, then they all of a sudden can cause people to get frustrated or angry.
That's a good point, yeah.
Because that's the one thing where I'm like,
Yeah.
if they've recognized how successful these technologies have been, where the world became reliant on them, where everyone has one. It wasn't just this little niche thing.
Yeah.
The world relies on it. And then if they're like, we're going to make a giant dramatic change that may not quote unquote make it better.
Yeah.
It's more something that's going
just
to
changing up the formula.
change it up so that maybe it's going to add something new. People only like new things if it makes it simpler.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing. Like when you added the touch screen and you got rid of the keypad, there was probably a few people complaining, but it's made life so much more simple for everyone else using it.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to switch something out, everyone has got so comfortable with this that they see how simple it is. And it's been so long. If you recognize what was the first iPhone, 2007 or so?
Something like that, yeah.
And where we are now is 16 years later, where that type of technology hasn't changed. They were trying to develop the phone to get so much better till they reached this iteration that is almost accomplishes what they want it to.
Yeah.
And now they're like, well, we can completely change it again, but are people not going to like it where we're going to end up just going back to where we were before? Because that's the fear, because that's what ends up happening. And then you see other companies like Samsung who creates like the ones that
the flip phones,
the flip ones where they open up and then you have both sides and both screens. I'm like, those weren't successful. Everyone just stayed if they have Samsung, they stayed with the Galaxy model.
Yep.
They didn't go and flip to the bifold usually, unless you're like techie or something.
Like you really curious, yeah. I feel like that is a struggle that I think all facets of like entertainment deal with, where it's like you could look at like, oh, people were saying, oh, every Call of Duty game is the same, and it's like, well,
why change what works?
Yeah, they all sell extremely well. And it wasn't until they started selling bad to where they shook it up again. And look at Marvel movies. People are like, oh, every Marvel movie is the same. It's like, well, they all make $1 billion. Now people are talking about changing them because the last few movies haven't done very well. It's like, okay, now I think they might be more inclined to shake up the formula. It's like, why would they shake up the formula when they had an 8-year run of every single movie they made, got a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, and made $1 billion? And then iPhones, okay, well, they all sell really well. It's like, okay, well, why would we reinvent the wheel? It works, But then people are going to be like, oh, well, it's the same as it always has been. But then they might change it. Like, I mean, like, I'm trying to think of an example. Like, this is a niche example, but I guess go back to Call of Duty, right? Like, people are like, oh, every game is the same. So then they made it so you had, like, jetpacks and that kind of stuff, and it was futuristic, and everyone was like, oh, this is stupid. We want to go back to World War II. And then they went back to World War II, and everyone was like, it's just the same as it used to be. And then they went back, and everyone's like, oh, we hate this. And it's like, okay, well, you're never going to, like, why? It's from a company perspective, it's like, why do you want me to innovate, or do you want me to keep it the same? Like, because when I keep it the same, you complain about me keeping it the same. And when I innovate, you complain about you miss how it used to be.
Yeah.
And I just feel like with technology, and look at fashion, like, oh, like, okay, there's like trends, like, oh, skinny jeans. Like when we were growing up, oh, everyone had skinny jeans, and now we're back to, like, I mean, working at a school, I'm like, what? I got made fun of for wearing Crocs. I got made fun of for wearing Crocs in school. In elementary school, middle school, I wore Crocs all the time. I got made fun of for wearing Crocs. Every kid wears Crocs. I'm like, I'm not that much older. I'm only 6 years older than some of these kids. Every kid wears Crocs. I got made fun of for wearing Crocs not that long ago. Like, and so it's like, I just, it's everything is going to be always changing. And then I think it is a circle, I would be, well, like, Nokia came back, like they were like it's not, and BlackBerry came back. Like, it's not, the majority of people in the developed world have iPhone or Galaxy. That's just a fact. Or I know Google Pixel and other stuff, but I know people when BlackBerry a couple of years ago made their comeback, they brought back the typing keyboard flip phones. People bought them. They sold decently well. And so it just, now we're back to where some people want to go back to simple. Like I remember my dad's talked about it a lot. He's like, I'm about to just get a flip phone. He's like, I can't stand it anymore. And so it's like, I think what I think people should do is just have options. Like, it's easier to do it with phones. Like I know like an iPhone or Galaxy, they could hypothetically release, when they make the next line, they could have a standard, they could have a flip model, they could have a physical keypad model, and then you're hypothetically satisfying everybody. But then you're diverting your resources more out and
Yeah.
you're spreading out more.
You can't just mass
And
produce one.
yeah, and it's like, I hear a lot in teaching where people will say like trying to appeal to the average, you actually end up appealing to nobody.
Sure.
Because the average by definition is everybody's opinions or everybody's scores and then divide it by the amount of people, right? The odds of someone actually being, let's say like the average score of a test is a 72.5%. The odds of anybody having an exact 72.5 is not that likely.
True.
So it's like if you're trying to appeal to the average, and I'm kind of going off what we were saying earlier, but like when it comes to like technology and that kind of stuff and like innovation versus doing what works, I do think that, it's above my pay grade. I'm not a tech mogul, but
Yeah.
I don't envy the job of trying to look at like data of like what people like, because it's like, okay, well, are we going to try and which demographic are we going to appeal to? You kind of eventually have to pick one.
No one's average, and that's the thing.
Yeah.
Well, because as you said, I think I heard where they were talking about either it was World War II or Korean and Vietnam War era, where they were building planes and.
Oh, I've heard this before. Yeah.
Where they were building the planes and they're like, okay, so how do we build this? And they're like, okay, we'll just build to the average pilot size.
Yeah.
And they do that and no one fits. Everyone's uncomfortable. Nothing works. And then they recognize, okay, and then they're like, why does this not work? And then they look at it and they're like, oh, no one actually is the average size. No one's the average height. No one's the average weight. No one has these actual measurements. So they had to start building them to each person independently, because no one fits that average mold. The average doesn't tell you that much in reality, because that's not where most people are, because of how large it's a curve. If you see it, it's like a bell curve.
Yeah.
Where it's people, no one actually is in that average portion as much, and the same people that might be in the average for height might be different for weight. They might be different for different sizes. People have different forms, and you can't. And in that same sense, when you relate it to new technologies, there's so many different principles out there that if you try to satisfy the average, both sides are going to be frustrated.
Yeah, exactly.
No one actually will be happy.
Yeah.
And if you diversify into different options, you might actually end up causing yourself to lose more money, because you have to diversify your factories, all these different facilities. And it leaves a lot of stress, I could imagine, to them too.
Yeah. I feel like there are examples like where it does work out for the best, but like clothes, like small, medium, large, XL, double XL, like, I'm one of the many people where, depending on the brand, I'm either a medium or a large, that kind of stuff. So it's like, there are times when it's like, okay, yeah, I'm like, man, I wish it was a little bit taller or a little bit bigger. And I could guarantee I'm always going to be one size, or I wish it was a little bit shorter and a little bit thinner, and I could guarantee I was that size. So it's like, there are times, there aren't that many people probably that are, I am a medium no matter what, or I am an XL no matter what. I feel like brand by brand, what's a large shirt for PacSun might fit me perfectly, but then a large shirt at Old Navy might not fit me at all. And so it's like, every company is different. So I have found now where I have found clothing brands where it's like, oh, I know that this clothing brand, when I get a large, always fits me great. So I'm going to go there. And I am now their demographic. Like, I am the demographic that likes large shirts from this brand. So I feel like with clothing, it is easier to kind of just do whatever, because people can typically find a running theme of, I'm always a double XL, I'm always a small. And then if they find a brand that, oh man, the double XL shirts from JCPenney always fit me, I'm going to go there all the time. Boom, JCPenney has won. They succeeded in getting people of that height and weight and build to buy their clothing brand. But there's a billion other clothing brands, so you can kind of do whatever. But with phones, it's like, there's only like a few main competitors. So it's like, if I don't like iPhones, if I don't like Samsung Galaxy, if I don't like Google Pixel, I'm kind of out of luck.
You just have to like
you just take whatever is the closest to what you like. So there are situations where you can kind of more go towards the average, or kind of go towards what you consider the average, and it works out, but sometimes you can't.
Some of that also is left to the fact that, well, if you compare it to, when we're talking about phones and stuff, there also is incentive based on community. If everyone around you has one type, then you're going to use that type.
Yeah.
Even if, let's say, some technology on the other is better.
Yeah.
And that's the big debate.
Well,
with
that's the only
Apple
reason why I
and
have an
Samsung.
iPhone. I think Galaxies are better in my opinion, but I only have an iPhone because most people in my life have iPhones, and it's just easier. It's just easier to have the blue. I know the blue text. Oh, the big almighty blue text. We can't have you in the group chat because you have an Android. So it's like, okay, I only have an iPhone because most people in my life do. I personally think Androids are better. So like you were saying, like some people, they're just social pressures, But yeah.
That's interesting that even you could just see it in different situations, because that's just one, and there's multiple different ways that can come up. I think we hit a lot of the topics, but if you have anything else to add. I guess one other thing we didn't talk too much about is, and it would relate to subbing, would be if there's any influences you've seen. And we talked movies, we talked about some of that stuff. Where have you seen some of these influences on culture, such as movies or TV shows, or these things influence society? If that be like, and maybe that your direct relation to it would be if it be college students, or if it be even middle schoolers or high schoolers, wherever you are. Has there been an impact when you see the shift of people towards these new technologies and what's out there? And if you could look at it on, and we talked about, you could look movies, TV, apps, stuff like TikToks that have influenced
I would
society.
Absolutely say, Twitch.
Sure.
Twitch streamers, oh my goodness. Everybody, all the boys at the school talk, like Auden Ross and Kai Cenat and Speed, like all these, like I don't watch these, I know who they are because I'm a very, like I am a very online person. Like I have a very large online presence. And then also with the kids is like they're like, oh, Mr. M, do you watch Auden Ross? And I'm like, no. But it's like I know enough about these Twitch streamers where, at least generalizing here, but middle school boys are the demographic. I think that a lot of Twitch streamers and YouTubers will admit to you that their demographic is 12 to 15-year-olds, Like, and I see my sister just like okay, whatever the YouTuber that she's watching is eating or buying, she will want to do that. And myself, I have bought I bought stuff before because I see a NBA player I like wearing, like, I'll buy these shoes because I know that they are Jason Tatum shoes. So it's like I think everybody is susceptible to that, but I think with school and like subbing, like you were saying, like what influences, I think Twitch streamers have a huge influence on middle school boys and their vocab and like what they think is funny. Like I started out of curiosity, I would just watch clips from these people's streams, and I'm like, oh, that's why every kid talks like that. That's why they think this joke is funny, because they're seeing this person has 1 million people watching their stream. They're worth millions of dollars. They live this awesome life where they play video games all day. They stream it. They tell jokes. They have, they're friends with LeBron. They have nice cars. They live in LA, and then they want to emulate that. So it's like if when Auden Ross, he did a stream with LeBron James. And it's like, why wouldn't you want to talk like him? Yeah. He lives the dream. He plays 2K all day.
He clearly looks successful.
Yeah, he looks successful to you. And so it's like, I think that Twitch streamers and like content creators have a huge influence. And I follow content creators that have admitted before, like, they'll say, oh, I don't want to complain about my life. They're like, people wake up and work hard labor 12 hours a day. They're like, I get up and I film TikToks. But they do talk about how there is pressure of knowing, like I know Charli D'Amelio, who's like not the number one, but she was the number one most followed TikToker for like 2 years, and people would give her a lot of hate because she would talk sometimes about like the stress, like, oh, boo-hoo, you wake up in your mansion, and it's like, okay, yes, absolutely, but I can't imagine the stress of knowing that an army of 13-year-old girls take what I say as gospel. And so it's like with middle school, I think they're at the prime age where they look up to these athletes, they look up to content creators, and they want to be just like them. And, and so like whatever they do, that's cool. That's okay. And I see it a lot with athletes, like they dress a certain way. Yeah. They want kids start dressing like that, like Nike Tech. Like all the kids at Rao wear Nike Tech, and it's like I know that was started because it was a meme. It was like, oh, you got Nike Tech? Like it was like a meme trend.
Sure.
And now all these kids wear Nike Tech,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, I know you're only doing it because it's like, oh, it's a joke, it's a meme, whatever, And I think that it can be good and bad. Like when there is a hugely popular thing out in the entertainment space, I think it can draw people together. Like when the World Cup was going on. So normally the World Cup happens during the summer. But because this last World Cup was in Qatar, it was way too hot to play in the summer. So they did it in December. And so it was the first time ever, and probably the last time ever, that the World Cup will be going on during what is considered the typical school year. I know some people go to school during the summer, but for the most part, they don't. And I watched people who didn't even care about soccer or sports. They were brought together. Like everyone, like we were, hey, you finish your work? We'll throw on the game. At lunch, no kid was going outside. They were going to the gym because we had a projector screen. We were having the World Cup matches on. Yeah, kids were showing up. Kids were showing up to school hour and a half early because some of the games, time zones. Yeah. Some of the matches would be on at like 7 a.m. We'd have a couple of teachers that would say, "Hey, can I come at 7 a.m. and we'll let kids know if their parent can drop them off, they can come watch the game." And I watched it build a sense of community. And I feel like then you kind of go to like celebrities and influencers and trends. I think it can be beneficial to where you have a large group of people in your social circle that are all into the same thing. Like, okay, most of my, like let's say like the 7th grader, most of my friends watch Auden Ross on Twitch. So if I tell a joke that he said, they're going to get that. And so I think that can help build a sense of community. Like when you're meeting a stranger, it definitely helps if you figure out quickly that you like the same TV shows. You have the similar taste in movies. That can spark a conversation. So I think it can be really beneficial, like influencer culture and that kind of stuff, to like kids have stuff in common. But then I also feel like kids take what these people say as gospel, and then they don't want to do anything else besides just try to emulate this person, which we talked about before the cameras were on. Like that is so rare. Like for every Logan Paul, there is 1,000 people who tried to do the same thing that completely failed. Mm-hmm. For every David Dobrik, that he literally just films his life and people eat it up. There is 1 million people who tried to just film their daily vlogs and they were seen by 5 people. True. And I think that is the negative part, is that all these kids see these people. Because like I think it used to be only like athletes and celebrities. Athletes and actors were the main people, right? And it's like, okay, to be in the NBA, you have to be good at basketball. To be in a Hollywood star, you have to be good at acting. Now you don't really have to do that anymore. If you get lucky with the algorithm, you could say, okay, you need to be funny, you need to be personable. You get lucky with the algorithm, I've seen some painfully unfunny people get very, really popular. Yeah. And I think that is a bad influence on the kids, is that they see these people that blow up for nothing and they're like, oh, I can do that. And it's like, well, kinda. Maybe. I went to high school with a girl who has 11 million followers on TikTok. Wow. And she's an actress. She's like posting the other day saying she's like in a movie. And I remember when I was in high school, she would talk about wanting to be famous, and I didn't know her. I knew her name, and I knew that she was a theater kid, and that was kind of it. And then she was a year or two ahead of me. She graduated. I never really thought about her. Yeah. And all of a sudden, I'm scrolling through TikTok, and I see her, and I'm like, that's Alyssa McKay. I know who Alyssa McKay is. I went to high school with her. And I tap her. I'm like, you have 7 million followers? What? And so it's like, that is insane. But it's like, I know a lot of people I went to high school with who tried to do TikTok. Oh, all school do TikTok, and then it'd be like, oh, person you may know. And like, oh, I went to high school with this person, and they have 5 followers, and they post 8 videos a day. They get 10 views. And I'm like, okay, yeah, for every Alyssa McKay and the Milwaukee high school graduates, there is 25 people who tried to get big on TikTok and didn't do it, Yeah. And so to answer your question, like, do I see like what kind of influences the kids? I think influencer culture is such an influence on the kids, and I think that it is good in some cases, but I would say, I don't want to say mostly bad.
Is there not as much accountability, you think?
Like with I think like accountability, like for the students or for like influencers
for the
and stuff.
Influencers.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, like look at like people in the NBA, like if an NBA player does something bad, they're gonna get fined or suspended.
Yeah.
Like this guy in the Memphis Grizzlies flashed a gun on Instagram Live, and he got suspended. He didn't play for like a month, and like he lost a lot. He lost his Nike endorsement. He lost his shoe deal. Everything. If an influencer says something bad, they disappear for 2 weeks. Like look at Logan Paul when he did the when he had his big controversy in the Japanese forest. He dipped out for a month, came back, made an apology video. It got like 80 million views, and I remember this. He in his first video after his apology, he was like, "How many YouTubers do you think can get canceled and gain 1 million subs in the month they didn't upload?" And it's like, I feel like, we talk about cancel culture and that kind of stuff. I think when you look, it used to be like, okay, if an actor does something bad, they're not getting cast in movies anymore. If a athlete does something bad, they're going to get suspended. They're going to get fined. They're going to get their endorsement deals taken away. I feel like because of YouTube and TikTok and that kind of stuff, you can kind of do there's guidelines, there's community guidelines. You can't do certain things. But I feel like you can get away with so much more because you post an apology video. You know how much that apology video has an ad run before it, and it has a mid-roll ad, and it has an ad at the end. You're making bank off your apology video. And so I definitely think that is why I would say it is negative, I think, more negative than positive, because these people that kids are looking up to now can get away with so much more than even people that I looked up to as a kid.
Is there any fear that in some of those other situations, there can be sometimes the restraints that are held on people, if it be like NBA or if you look at Hollywood, sometimes it doesn't completely feel like they're fair when they do have their limitations or their rules, where sometimes YouTube or Twitch can offer. But that's the struggle. Where's that balance? Because you either have a Wild West type of setting where there's no rule, or potentially you have rules that you don't know who governs the rules. Yeah,
it's true. Yeah, I know people have said, like, people go off Twitter because they feel like they can't voice certain opinions for fear of getting like banned. Yeah. So I definitely think that there is like there is a thin line of like, okay, what should celebrities be held accountable for? Because at the end of the day, me and Chris Evans are exactly the same. He might be rich and famous and he's Captain America, but he's a human just like me.
Sure.
I can probably get away with doing something stupid because I'm nobody in the grand scheme of like the world perspective. Chris Evans eats a hot dog. All of a sudden he hates animals. And it's like, oh, he's not vegan. And so it's like, I think they are held to a higher standard,
Which is
and that isn't fair.
That's what I was only going to say. Like, you have such a level of accountability for someone that is just an actor. Yeah. That's the one thing where I'll say, I'm like, you put that accountability on them. It doesn't completely make sense for what they're doing. Like, even because I would say, I would have a higher scrutiny for someone who's like more. It's ironic. I feel like we should have a higher scrutiny for people who are politicians because they have far more control over things, and then sometimes it feels like they aren't held accountable. Yeah. And then people like actors. I watch your movie because I think you're a good actor and I enjoy your role. I don't really care about your opinion. Yeah. And it's like holding them to it for if they have an extreme view, it's hard to actually know that balance because it's like, that's not why I go to you. But also maybe there needs to be some accountability for some stuff they say. Yeah. But I don't know that balance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people say like separate the art from the artist. Yeah. But then you go like to politicians where it's like, okay, well, like your art is what that affects me. If there is someone that gets elected then it comes out that they have a hatred towards a specific group of people, or they have a strong desire to maybe funnel money into this system. Sure. It's like, oh, well, that directly affects me. What does not directly affect me is who Pete Davidson is dating at the moment. And so it's like, I do think that, like, I actually just yesterday, Pete Davidson did an interview with John Bernthal, and he was talking about, they're two actors, people who don't know. And he was talking about how, because for people who don't know, Pete Davidson is kind of famous for like, he's always dating some sort of celebrity woman. Like they'll break up, and then a month later, it's like, how does he keep getting away with this? And it's like, and he was talking about, he was like, everyone cares so much about who I'm dating. He was like, why? He was like, I work for SNL. He was like, people are like, how does he keep meeting these women? It's like, he's like, I work at SNL. He's like, that's like one of the entertainment capitals of the world. He was like, I meet these people at work. He's like, it's no different than the dude who works at Taco Bell dating his coworker. He's like, I date people around me. He's like, why do people care? And I was like, exactly. I was like, I like his stand-up specials. I'm interested in his life a little bit. But I was like, when I'm reading the 8th article about Pete Davidson and Kim K's date in Cabo, I'm like, why
do I care?
I do not care. and then they'll be like, oh, like this celebrity was drinking Dunkin' Donuts. I'm making this up. I don't know. Dunkin' Donuts recently was caught having a factory in China.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, I drink Dunkin' Donuts. Are you going to get mad at me? No. You're getting mad at so-and-so? They're just at the grand scheme of things, they're human,
we
you know.
Not making a claim that Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, I love Dunkin' Donuts. I love Dunkin' Donuts. We don't have it over here.
I just can't get sued, you know.
Yeah, I love Dunkin' Donuts. Just an example, Company X.
Yes.
You support Company. Chris Evans supports Company X. Ben Affleck supports Company X. It's like, I buy stuff from Company X.
Yeah.
But it's not a big deal when I do it. But because they are in the Matrix, it's a big deal, you know.
Sure.
And so I do think that it is dangerous with that kind of stuff because like it's like, oh, it's not fair you're being held to a higher standard. But at the end of the day, I'm also going to say, hey, in a lot of situations, you chose this line of work.
True.
You are signing up to be a role model, whether you like some people like talk about NBA players, like they'll say like people say like shut up and dribble. Like they don't want NBA players to be like voicing their opinions on like kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, well, yes, but they signed up to do this job and they are aware that there is millions of kids watching the post-game interview that are going to listen to what they say. So they do kind of have an obligation to maybe say what they think on something like that, you know? So if that backfires on you, you chose to be a celebrity, you know?
Is they may feel an obligation to speak into it,
Mm-hmm.
but when someone will listen to them who's a child, they don't have the expertise.
Context,
They don't the context. They might have this. They might have read the same article you read, and be reaching a large conclusion.
Yeah.
Rather than some of these kids going to an expert, and that's the one area where, if you are using, I don't think children or kids should use a actor or
I agree.
a basketball player as a reference for what is right or wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or even context into what's going on in the world, because they're an expert at something. They're an expert at basketball.
Yeah.
I'll go and I'll listen to you when they're talking about basketball.
Yeah.
But if they're talking about something going on, they don't have the obligation to be completely accurate about that, in the sense they would have scrutiny from that community.
Yeah.
And people who are experts in that topic have the scrutiny of the people in that that are related to that. Like if you're talking about something going on in the economics, let's say whatever was all that stuff going on with crypto when that guy was manipulating that system.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so if someone was speaking into that, they have the scrutiny and they have the expertise. They have the scrutiny of the people in crypto. They have the scrutiny of like economists. They have these people who they're accountable to.
Yeah.
And that is the one thing where I don't think those basketball players or actors have that accountability.
Yeah.
So they don't need to be completely accurate. People have that. And that's the thing where we get mad at them for what they say because we don't have that accountability on them. That's the one thing. Because I don't think we don't hold them accountable for what they say that's wrong.
Yeah.
We just tell them, we're like, we don't want to hear it because you aren't informed. Potentially, you may not have as much information. And if you're saying what you're saying and you had information and you were an expert in it, we'd listen to you. But you haven't given us evidence why you are, because you're famous for this reason, not this. And it's one of those things where it's hard to listen to someone who's an expert in one thing trying to give expertise on, and that happens in a bunch of other fields.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if I want to listen to someone who has a doctorate in physics telling me what I need to do to eat healthy for my body. Yeah. Because maybe they had their own journey, but they also don't have the experience.
They didn't spend years studying that kind of stuff. Yeah.
They haven't and there's people who are more connected. Like you could imagine a biologist being more connected to that.
Mm-hmm.
But physics, I'm going to go to them for theoretical physics. I'm going to go to them for even some engineering applications because they have more a direct relation, and I'm not going to go to the biologist for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's you look at these experts for what they know because that's what they're taught, and I don't think it's completely fair. Even on some of these experts, I'm not going to hold them accountable for something they aren't completely aware of because they know they could be wrong, and that's the one thing where I think basketball players don't have that accountability where they will admit they're wrong.
Yeah, for sure.
They don't have a need.
They kind of have more built-in excuse, like where it's like, oh, well, at the end of the day, I'm not a expert, and so to kind of like tie it together, like, I do think that like these people have a major like influence on the youth and that kind of stuff, and it's like you signed up, you signed up to do this in a lot of cases fully by your own validity. You chose to pursue a path where you are gonna be someone that people do look to, whether or not it makes sense. Like why is everyone like Leonardo DiCaprio is an actor, but he's a really big climate activist and that kind of stuff, right? And it's like I'm pretty sure he doesn't have any like education credentials about that kind of stuff. So it's like, okay, you chose to be someone that people might look to for advice, whether not just celebrity, that's just the world we live in, it's celebrity culture. And so I do think that it is unfair of them that they are expected to, like actors or athletes or people who are on YouTubers and that kind of stuff. It is unfair that they are expected to be a role model.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say is if they're in that situation, they also have the capability of pointing people in the right direction.
That's true.
And that might be the better thing. If they're asked to comment on something like that, they're like, I don't really have all the information. I have my opinions, but here's this good expert. He just wrote this article on it. You can go read it yourself. He said this. Even if you may not even need to say this. Yeah. But you're like, go do your own research. I have my opinion, but I'm not an expert in this, and I don't want to lead people in a direction that I'm not completely informed to. Because that's the one thing where I'm hesitant for them to speak into it if they don't know, and this might be the only place where a kid will hear an opinion on it, and they're going to, because what you said about Twitch streamers and all these people, they're going to take that as fact. They're not going to go and counter it to an expert who's going to be like, maybe smart parts of what he said were a tiny bit accurate, but he was dramatic on this. Because they don't have that need to be, they can't lose their license. They can't lose their potential, whatever. They can't, they're not going to lose their position at the university.
If he's wrong about
so-and-so. So they have to be accountable to that comment. And he doesn't have to be accountable to that comment. He just has to be good at basketball. Yeah. And that's the one thing. Because I more think they would have the responsibility to put people in the right direction. Even if they share it, I think they need to point people in the right direction compared to just say something extremely strongly, because they don't have the know-it-all to give people a very intelligent answer on this because they haven't needed to.
Yeah. Well, it's no different than like taking a regular person. Like, why would I go up to someone who is a band teacher and ask them for advice on sheetrocking my house? Like, a normal person wouldn't be expected to do that. Sure. And so I do think that it is. I think ideally, like, they would do what you're saying, where it's like when a celebrity or like a person of like internet popularity gets a microphone stuck in their face, they would just be honest, say, hey, you know what? I make videos of me driving around LA pranking people. I am not an expert on so-and-so. But hey, I read this great book one time. Or there's this author who publishes a lot of really insightful articles on this topic. You go here. Yeah. I think that would be ideal. And it's just, that's why it does make me feel like sad sometimes when it's like I do see kids like in school and then just in general, like just idolize people and then just take their word so much, because I'm like, man, like, okay, like, if you want to dress the way that someone dresses, that's cool. You want to follow their fashion sense? Okay, you're choosing to dress. That's just clothing. But like when you start basing like personality and like beliefs, your opinions on like things about life, just because Mark Wahlberg told you to, I'm like, what are you doing? And it's like I definitely see a lot of that with the kids. Like, where I'm like, why do you think that way? And they're like, oh, because of this. And I'm like, what?
Oh, alrighty.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
I think there's a nice balance between accountability and also, because we do enjoy everyone does watch their stuff, and we
Mhm.
do look at their opinions,
yeah.
but they may have that need to be more accountable to.
Mm-hmm.
I think they should have that accountability to themselves.
Yeah.
It's more of a sense where you can't completely enforce it, but have the respect and dignity for yourself to not share false information.
Yeah.
And if you're unaware, to admit that you could be wrong. And maybe, but that's a human trait that everyone could know
Yeah.
rather than speaking strong on something. But
Yeah.
that's also something that needs a lot of work, and you need to put a lot of time and diligence to, even for the sake of what you would say to any friend, if that makes sense. But I don't know. I enjoyed our conversation.
I liked it. Yeah. I think we tied it. I think we tied
We
everything
did. It
together
kinda
kind of nicely.
looped
Yeah.
together.
I liked it. Yeah.
But so I want to thank Austin for coming. Thank you for listening and watching. And I think we'll leave it there. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching my conversation with Austin McCarville. I hope you enjoyed it. I will leave you with a quote from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Behavior is the mirror in which everyone shows their image. Thank you for watching, and I hope you like it and share it.